When my wife Jenna and I first toured the charming Shady Oaks neighborhood, it seemed like the perfect place to start our lives together. The well-manicured lawns, friendly neighbors waving from their porches, and quaint Yard of the Month signs gave the impression of a tight-knit community. We fell in love with a cute craftsman bungalow with a wide front porch and a little white picket fence. It was like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. We made an offer on the spot, excitedly signing the papers and accepting the hefty folder of Homeowners Association bylaws without a second glance. That was our first mistake. At our first neighborhood barbecue, we were introduced to the HOA president, Karen Smith. She was a tall, severe-looking woman in her late 50s with a helmet of immovable black hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She welcomed us with a saccharine grin and a bone-crushing handshake. "Congratulations on joining our little slice of paradise," she cooed, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We're so pleased to welcome you to Shady Oaks. Just remember to keep our community beautiful and property values high. We all have to do our part and follow the rules." She handed us another copy of the bylaws, a thick stack of papers covered in tiny print, and winked conspiratorially. "I'm sure you understand. We're all in this together, after all." Jenna and I exchanged a nervous glance but brushed it off. After all, how bad could it be? We were just excited to be part of this picturesque community. Karen was probably just a little overzealous, but she seemed to have the neighborhood's best interests at heart. We smiled, nodded, and sipped our lemonade, eager to mingle with our new neighbors and settle into our dream home. We were painfully naive. We found out exactly how bad it could be when we received our first violation notice taped to our front door just 2 weeks later. Improper flower bed mulching. It read in harsh black letters. Mulch must be a uniform dark brown hue. Please replace the offending red mulch within 7 days to avoid further action. Jenna rolled her eyes and muttered something about busybody control freaks with nothing better to do, but not wanting to make a fuss, we dutifully replaced the mulch. It was a small thing, and really, what was the big deal about mulch color in the grand scheme of things? But then the notices kept coming. Apparently, our cute and kitschy "Welcome to our porch" sign on the front steps was an unauthorized decoration. Our vintage porch swing was an unapproved seating type. Even our doormat, a housewarming gift from my mom with our names and a cheerful sunflower, was deemed an eyesore that disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. Each trivial infraction came with an ominous threat of unspecified further action if we didn't comply immediately. It was like living under the eye of some petty, vindictive god, just waiting to smite us for the smallest transgression. At first, we laughed it off as a sort of surreal suburban comedy of errors. But the constant scrutiny and nitpicking slowly eroded the rosy glow of our new home. Jenna stopped humming as she tended the garden. I found myself checking over my shoulder whenever I went to fetch the mail, half expecting to see Karen lurking behind a bush, ready to pounce with a new violation. The final straw came when we received a certified letter announcing we were being fined $500 for having an unauthorized lawn ornament. The ornament in question, a whimsical painted rock that my 6-year-old niece had gifted to us as a good luck charm. Seeing Jenna's look of hurt and outrage as she read that cold, officious letter, I felt something in me snap. This wasn't a community, it was a prison, and Karen was our tin-pot dictator warden. But I'd be damned if I was going to roll over and let her suck all the joy out of our lives and turn our home into another solace cog in her machine. That night, as we lay in bed silently stewing, an idea began to take shape. If Karen wanted a fight, then by God, I'd give her one. I didn't care if she had an army of bylaw-thumping busybodies on her side. I had right, reason, and a thirst for vengeance. It was time for the Shady Oaks HOA to learn that they'd messed with the wrong homeowner. Viva la revolution! The morning after our fateful decision to stand up to Karen and her HOA goon squad, I was rudely awakened by the sound of Jenna cursing loudly from the front porch. Stumbling blearily downstairs, I found her glaring at a neon orange piece of paper stuck to our front door. "What fresh hell is this?" I grumbled, squinting at the eye-searing notice. Excessively vocal songbirds, Is this a joke? Apparently, the lovely music of our wind chimes is disturbing the peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood, and we have 24 hours to take them down before we're fined $200 for every day they remain. Jenna seethed, her knuckles white around her coffee mug. I saw red. Those wind chimes had been a wedding gift from my late grandmother. They were a sweet, tinkling reminder of her every time we sat on the porch, and now this jumped-up bureaucrat with a Napoleon complex was trying to tear them down. "Oh, hell no," I growled, snatching the notice off the door. "Karen has gone too far this time. These chimes aren't going anywhere." Jenna looked at me, a grim smile spreading across her face. "I think it's time we had a little chat with Madame President, don't you?" An hour later, we were marching into the HOA office, armed with our righteous anger and a copy of the bylaws that I'd scored the night before to find any mention of excessively vocal songbirds. Spoiler alert, there wasn't one. Karen was seated behind a massive mahogany desk, her thin lips pursed into a disapproving scowl as we barged in. "Ah, the troublemakers of Lot 27, she drawled, setting down her monogrammed fountain pen. To what do I owe this unscheduled disruption? I slapped the orange notice down on her desk, barely resisting the urge to laugh as she flinched back from the garish color. We're here to discuss this ridiculous complaint, Karen. There's nothing in the bylaws about wind chimes or birdsong. You have no right to fine us or demand we take them down." Karen smiled coldly, leaning back in her leather chair. "Oh, you poor naive thing. You think just because it's not spelled out in black and white, I can't control every aspect of your pathetic little lives. I am the law in Shady Oaks. I can find a violation in the way your grass grows if I feel like it." Jenna leaned forward, her green eyes blazing. "Listen up, you power-tripping tyrant. We aren't your subjects and this isn't your kingdom. We're homeowners and citizens, and we have rights. You can't just make up rules to suit your whims." Karen barked out a harsh laugh. "Rights? Oh, honey, you signed those away the second you bought property in my perfect little community. I own you now. I own every last one of you pathetic peasants." She stood up, bracing her hands on the desk as she loomed over us. "Now you have a choice. Take down those hideous chimes, or I'll make it my personal mission to bleed you dry with every fine, fee, and legal action I can dream up until you're begging me to let you sell that eyesore you call a house. I won't rest until I've stripped you of every last shred of joy and individuality. Shady Oaks will be perfect, and you will conform or suffer. Understand?" I wish I could say I had a snappy comeback, that I put her in her place with a witty barb and a dramatic exit. But the truth is, in that moment, staring into the soulless black pits of her eyes, I felt a chill of pure, primal fear. This woman wasn't just a petty busybody drunk on a thimbleful of power. She was a monster, and we had unknowingly walked right into her lair. Jenna must have sensed it too, because she grabbed my hand, her fingers trembling as she pulled me toward the door. "This isn't over, Karen," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You can't bully us forever." Karen just smiled that empty, shark-like smile. "Oh, sweetie, I'm just getting started." In the weeks following our chilling confrontation with Karen, Jenna and I walked on eggshells, terrified of drawing her ire. We took down the wind chimes with heavy hearts and submitted to her every whim, from painting our shutters the exact shade of Shady Oaks beige, to ripping out the unapproved tulips Jenna had planted along our walkway. But even our total compliance couldn't save us from Karen's wrath. The violation notices kept coming, each one more nitpicky and absurd than the last. Our welcome mat was half an inch too wide. The wattage of our porch light was obtrusive. Even our poor dog Max couldn't escape her critical eye. His happy barks as he played in the yard were deemed a persistent nuisance. It was like living under a microscope in a totalitarian state, every tiny aspect of our lives controlled and scrutinized. Jenna grew quieter, her natural vivacity dimmed. I found myself dreading coming home, my stomach knotting with anxiety every time I turned onto our street. The final straw came when we got a certified letter announcing we were being fined $1,000 for unapproved exterior modifications to a dwelling. I racked my brain trying to figure out what we could have possibly done to warrant such an extreme penalty. Then it hit me, the birdhouse. The previous weekend, my 8-year-old nephew Timmy had visited and gifted us a little wooden birdhouse he made at scout camp. He was so proud of it, beaming from ear to ear as he pressed it into my hands. "I painted it Shady Oaks brown, Uncle Nick," he chirped. "That way it matches and you won't get in trouble." Touched by his thoughtfulness, I'd hung it on the big oak tree in our front yard. It was a tiny thing, barely noticeable among the leaves. But apparently, even that small act of personal expression was too much for Karen to bear. Fury boiled up inside me, hot and blinding. I snatched up the letter and stormed out of the house, Jenna hurrying after me as I marched down the street to Karen's immaculate McMansion. I hammered on her door, ready to unleash holy hell. But it wasn't Karen who answered. It was Mr. Abernathy, the mild-mannered retired teacher who lived next door. "Oh, thank goodness," he said, his lined face sagging with relief. "I thought I was the only one." "The only one what?" Jenna asked, frowning. Mr. Abernathy glanced around furtively before ushering us inside. There, sitting in Karen's living room, was a group of our neighbors, all clutching similar certified letters and wearing identical expressions of fearful rage. "She's out of control," Mrs. Nguyen from across the street whispered, her eyes shiny with unched tears. "She's threatening to foreclose on us because our daughter's chalk drawings are defacing the sidewalk." "She had my car towed for being the wrong shade of white," Mr. Jackson said, his fists clenched. "I had to pay $500 to get it back." One by one, the tales of Karen's outrageous abuses poured out, each more shocking than the last. She wasn't just a controlling busybody. She was a tyrant, wielding the HOA bylaws like a cudgel to beat us all into submission. As I listened, a cold, clear rage crystallized inside me, sharp as a shard of glass. This ended now. I stood up, drawing the eyes of the room. "We can't let her get away with this," I said, my voice ringing with conviction. "She's not just ruining our lives. She's stealing our homes, our peace of mind, our basic human dignity. We have to fight back." "But how?" Mr. Abernathy asked, wringing his hands. "She holds all the power." I smiled grimly. "Not all of it. Not anymore. We have something stronger than bylaws and fines on our side. We have each other. It's time to show Karen that Shady Oaks doesn't belong to her. It belongs to us." As I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, lit with a fragile but growing hope, I felt the first stirrings of a plan taking shape. Karen may have started this war, but we were damn well going to finish it. And now that we knew we weren't alone, that we had an army of our own, there was no way in hell we could lose. In the days following our clandestine meeting in Karen's living room, Jenna and I threw ourselves into planning our rebellion. We started small, whispering in corners with our most trusted neighbors, gathering intel on Karen's latest abuses and plotting our next moves. We discovered that Karen's power wasn't as absolute as she believed. The HOA bylaws required a quorum of board members for any major decision, and so far, Karen had been ruling by fear and intimidation alone. If we could convince enough of our neighbors to stand with us, we could challenge her reign at the next board meeting and strip her of her authority. It wasn't going to be easy. Karen had eyes and ears everywhere, and the slightest whiff of dissent was met with swift and brutal retaliation. We had to be careful, meeting in secret and communicating through a network of coded messages and whispered conversations. But slowly, steadily, our numbers grew. Mr. Abernathy, with his quiet dignity and lifetime of community respect, became our unofficial second-in-command, his living room our war room. Mrs. Nguyen, with her keen eye for detail, took charge of documenting Karen's every violation and abuse of power. Even old Mr. Henderson, the neighborhood's resident grump, joined our cause, his gnarled hands trembling with rage as he recounted how Karen had threatened to evict him for displaying his hard-earned war medals on his mantle. We were building an army, united by our shared pain and our determination to take back our homes and our lives. But we knew that to truly defeat Karen, we'd need more than just numbers. We'd need irrefutable proof of her tyranny. That's where Jenna came in. With her artist's eye and tech-savvy skills, she hatched a plan to catch Karen in the act. She set up hidden cameras around the neighborhood, disguised as birdhouses and garden gnomes, and hacked into Karen's email account, compiling a dossier of damning evidence of her abuses and financial improprieties. It was risky, and I feared for Jenna's safety every minute of every day. If Karen caught wind of what she was doing, there was no telling what she might do. But Jenna was fearless, driven by a righteous anger that burned hotter than any sun. "She's not going to get away with this," she told me one night as we huddled over her laptop, scrolling through pages of incriminating emails. "We're going to bring her down, Nick. We're going to make her pay for every family she's terrorized, every dream she's crushed. I promise you that." I believed her. In that moment, staring into the fire in her eyes, I believed anything was possible. But even with all our careful planning and covert ops, we never could have predicted how it would all come to a head. It was a sunny Saturday morning, the kind of day that made you forget for a moment that you were living under the iron fist of a sociopathic dictator. I was out mowing the lawn, keeping a wary eye out for any sign of Karen or her goons, when I heard the scream. It was coming from the direction of Mrs. Nguyen's house. I dropped the mower and sprinted across the street, my heart pounding in my throat. There, on Mrs. Nguyen's front lawn, was a scene straight out of a nightmare. Karen was standing over Mrs. Nguyen's sobbing daughter, a can of black paint in one hand and a brush dripping with viscous liquid in the other. On the sidewalk in front of them, the little girl's colorful chalk drawings were smeared and splattered, obliterated by ugly swathes of paint. "Let this be a lesson to you all," Karen snarled, her face twisted with cruel satisfaction. "No one defies me. No one." Something in me snapped. I don't remember crossing the lawn, don't remember wrenching the paintbrush from Karen's clawed fingers. All I remembered is the white-hot rage, the all-consuming need to protect, to defend, to fight. "Enough," I roared, my voice barely human. "This ends now, Karen. You're finished." Karen laughed, cold and mocking. "Oh, you poor, stupid man. You have no idea what you've just done." She pulled out her phone, dialed 3 numbers. "Hello, police. I'd like to report a case of vandalism and assault." "Yes, I'll hold." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. This was it, the final play in Karen's game. She was going to have me arrested, discredit me, destroy any chance we had of stopping her. I looked at Mrs. Nguyen's daughter, her tear-streaked face, the broken remains of her chalk dreams. I looked at the gathering crowd of my neighbors, their expressions ranging from fear to fury to grim resignation. And I made a choice. If I was going down, I was going down fighting. Karen wanted a war? Then by God, that's exactly what she'd get. As the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, I braced myself for the inevitable. This was it, the moment Karen had been waiting for. She was going to have me hauled off in handcuffs, discredit me as a dangerous criminal, and cement her grip on power. But I wasn't going down without a fight. "You think you've won," I said, my voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. "You think this is over. Think again, Karen. We have proof of everything you've done, every abuse, every violation, every dirty little secret. And we're going to make sure the whole world knows what kind of monster you really are." Karen's face went white, then red. "You're bluffing," she snarled. "You don't have shit." "Oh, but we do," came a voice from behind me. I turned to see Jenna and Mr. Abernathy standing at the head of a crowd of our neighbors, their faces set with grim determination. Jenna held up a thick folder, her triumph written in every line of her body. "Emails, bank records, video footage, eyewitness accounts," she said, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "We have it all, Karen. Every dirty deal, every bribe, every threat. You're finished." The folder was the product of months of careful planning and covert evidence gathering. It contained everything from footage of Karen personally destroying a neighbor's unapproved garden to emails proving she had been funneling HOA funds into her personal accounts. It was a bombshell, and we all knew it. Karen's eyes darted from the folder to the assembled crowd, the first flickers of fear showing in her expression. She opened her mouth to speak, but was cut off by the arrival of the police cruiser, its lights flashing red and blue. Two officers stepped out, their faces wary as they surveyed the scene. "We received a call about a disturbance," the taller one said. "What seems to be the problem here?" Karen rushed forward, her voice high and frantic. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. This man assaulted me. He and his wife have been terrorizing the neighborhood, violating HOA regulations left and right. I want them arrested immediately." The officers looked at me, then at the crowd of neighbors, their eyebrows raised. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, holding out my hands in a gesture of peace. "Officers, my name is Nick Johnson. I'm a homeowner here in Shady Oaks, and I've been falsely accused by Ms. Smith. The truth is, she's the one who's been terrorizing this community, abusing her power as HOA president, levying outrageous fines, even threatening to take people's homes. We have proof of her crimes, if you'll allow us to show you." I gestured to Jenna, who handed the folder to the officers. They flipped through it, their expressions shifting from skepticism to concern to outright shock as they took in the damning evidence. "Ms. Smith," the shorter officer said, his voice grave, "in light of these allegations, we're going to need you to come down to the station for questioning." Karen's face went from red to purple. "This is outrageous," she screamed. "I am the HOA president. I am the law in Shady Oaks. You can't do this to me." But even as she ranted and raved, the officers were already pulling out their handcuffs. "Ms. Smith, you have the right to remain silent," the taller one said, his voice brooking no argument. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As they led a struggling, screaming Karen to the squad car, a cheer went up from the assembled neighbors. Jenna threw her arms around me, her face wet with tears of relief and joy. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." I held her close, my heart swelling with pride and love for this amazing woman who had fought so hard for our home, our community, our very lives. But even as we celebrated our victory, I knew this was only the beginning. Karen may have been defeated, but the rock she represented ran deep. We had a long road ahead of us to rebuild Shady Oaks into the kind of community we all deserved. But as I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, united in their determination and their hope, I knew we were up for the challenge. Together, we would take back our neighborhood, one picket fence at a time. The weeks following Karen's arrest were a whirlwind of activity in Shady Oaks. With the iron fist of the HOA suddenly gone, it was like a spell had been lifted from the neighborhood. People came out of their houses, blinking in the sunlight like they'd been living underground for years. They gathered on front lawns and street corners, talking and laughing and sharing their stories of life under Karen's rule. It was a catharsis, a purging of the fear and resentment that had built up over so long. And as the stories poured out, a new picture of Shady Oaks began to emerge, not the perfect, soulless facade that Karen had tried to enforce, but a living, breathing community full of quirks and character and life. There was Mr. Nakamura, the retired engineer, who revealed that he'd been secretly building a koi pond in his backyard, risking Karen's wrath for a small slice of serenity. There was Ms. Johnson, the single mother, who confessed that she'd been taking her kids to the park in the next town over, just so they could play without fear of reprisal. And there was old Mrs. Perkins, who broke down in tears as she recounted how Karen had forced her to get rid of her beloved cat, her only companion after her husband passed. Each story was a piece of the puzzle, a window into the suffering and resilience of this community. And as we listened, Jenna and I knew that our work was just beginning. The first step was to dismantle the HOA itself. With Karen gone, her cronies quickly scattered, resigning from the board en masse in a desperate attempt to distance themselves from her reign of terror. That left a power vacuum, one that needed to be filled carefully and thoughtfully. We spent long hours poring over the bylaws, looking for loopholes and provisions that could be used to reform the system from within. We consulted with lawyers and community organizers, learning about alternative models for neighborhood governance that prioritized transparency, accountability, and resident empowerment. It was tedious, often frustrating work, but it was also deeply rewarding. With each small victory, Each amendment passed or abusive rule struck down, we could feel the fabric of the community growing stronger, more resilient. But we knew that the real test was still to come. Karen's trial was looming, and with it the threat of her return. She may have been disgraced and dethroned, but she was far from defeated. Even from her jail cell, she was plotting, scheming, looking for any opportunity to claw her way back to power. We needed to be ready. We needed to show the world who Karen really was, and why she could never be allowed to regain her hold over Shady Oaks. That's where Jenna's dossier came in. Over the next few weeks, we worked tirelessly to compile an airtight case against Karen, one that laid bare the extent of her crimes and abuses. We reached out to every neighbor who had ever been wronged by her, gathering testimony and documentation of her misdeeds. It was a painful, often emotional process. Many people were still afraid, still hesitant to speak out against their former tormentor. But slowly, one by one, they came forward, their voices shaky but determined. They told their stories to the police, to the media, to anyone who would listen. And with each new revelation, Karen's facade of power crumbled a little more. By the time the trial began, we were ready. We had a mountain of evidence, a united front of neighbors, and the truth on our side. As we marched into the courthouse, heads held high, I felt a swell of pride and purpose unlike anything I'd ever known. This was more than just a legal battle. This was a fight for the soul of our community, for the right to live free and unafraid in our own homes. And we would not back down, not until justice was served and Shady Oaks was free. As I took my seat in the front row of the gallery, Jenna's hand clasped tightly in mine, I caught Karen's eye across the room. She glared at me with a hatred so intense it was almost physical, her face twisted into a mask of rage and malice. But I just smiled back, calm and unafraid. She had no power over me anymore, over any of us. The judge banged his gavel, calling the court to order, and as the opening arguments began, I felt a sense of certainty settle over me like a warm blanket. We were going to win. Karen was going down, and Shady Oaks would rise again, stronger and better than ever before. It was a new day in the neighborhood, and I couldn't wait to see what it would bring. As the trial unfolded, the depth of Karen's corruption and malice became increasingly clear. Witness after witness took the stand, painting a damning picture of a woman drunk on power, willing to go to any lengths to maintain her iron grip on Shady Oaks. There was Mrs. Nguyen, who broke down in tears as she recounted how Karen had threatened to deport her elderly mother for hanging traditional Vietnamese decorations on their porch. There was Mr. Jackson, who described in horrifying detail the campaign of harassment and intimidation Karen had unleashed on his family after they dared to paint their house a color she didn't approve of. And there was Jenna, my rock and my partner through it all, who presented the meticulous records she had kept of Karen's financial improprieties, the black and white proof of her embezzlement and fraud. With each testimony, each piece of evidence, I could see the jury's disgust and outrage growing, and I could see the cracks in Karen's facade of composure, the sweat beading on her brow, and the tick in her jaw as she realized the extent of her own downfall. But even in the face of overwhelming evidence, Karen refused to go down quietly. When it was her turn to take the stand, she lashed out with all the venom and vitriol she could muster. She ranted and raved about the ungrateful residents of Shady Oaks, about how everything she had done had been for the good of the community, about how we were all just a bunch of rule-breaking malcontents who didn't deserve the paradise she had built for us. As I listened to her unhinged diatribe, I felt a strange sense of pity mingled with my anger. Here was a woman so twisted by her own need for control that she had lost sight of everything that truly mattered: kindness, compassion, basic human decency. She had become a monster, and in doing so, she had destroyed the very thing she claimed to love. In the end, the jury's verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. As the judge read out the litany of charges, fraud, embezzlement, extortion, harassment, and on, I watched the color drain from Karen's face, and when the sentence was handed down, 10 years in federal prison and a fine of over $1 million. I swear I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a brief moment of clarity and regret before the mask of rage slammed back down. As the bailiffs led her away in handcuffs, Karen thrashed and screamed, her carefully coiffed hair coming undone and her expensive suit rumpled and stained. She looked small, pathetic, a far cry from the terrifying figure who had loomed over our lives for so long. And then, just like that, it was over. The gavel banged, the courtroom emptied, and we were left standing there, Jenna and I, surrounded by our neighbors and friends, the people who had stood with us through it all. There were tears and hugs, laughter and cries of relief. It was like a weight had been lifted off the entire neighborhood, a dark cloud that had finally blown away to reveal the sun. But even as we celebrated, I knew that our work was far from finished. Karen may have been gone, but the scars she left behind would take time to heal. There were bylaws to be rewritten, a new HOA to be formed, a sense of community to be rebuilt from the ground up. It wouldn't be easy. There would be disagreements and setbacks, old wounds that would take time to mend. But as I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, at the determination and resilience I saw there, I knew that we were up for the challenge. Because Shady Oaks wasn't just a collection of houses and lawns and picket fences. It was a living, breathing thing, a tapestry woven from the hopes and dreams and struggles of every person who called it home. And now, at long last, it was ours again, ours to shape and nurture and grow in all its messy, imperfect glory. As we walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, clear day, I took Jenna's hand and smiled. "Let's go home," I said. "We have a neighborhood to rebuild." In the months that followed Karen's conviction, Shady Oaks underwent a transformation so profound it was almost miraculous. With the specter of the HOA's tyranny finally banished, the neighborhood seemed to blossom overnight, like a garden finally freed from the shadow of a poisonous tree. It started with small things, a fresh coat of paint here, a new set of wind chimes there. But soon, the changes became more dramatic. Mrs. Nguyen's porch blossomed with a riot of colorful silk lanterns and fragrant herbs. Mr. Jackson's house became a showcase of vibrant murals, each one telling a story of the family's journey and heritage. And in the center of it all, the once manicured park became a wildflower meadow, a buzzing, blooming testament to the beauty of natural diversity. But the changes weren't just cosmetic. With Karen gone and the old HOA dissolved, we had a chance to build something new, something better. We formed a neighborhood council, not to enforce arbitrary rules, but to foster a sense of community and cooperation. We organized block parties and potlucks, volunteer days, and skill-sharing workshops. We created a system of mutual aid and support, so that no one would ever feel alone or afraid in the face of hardship again. It wasn't always easy. There were disagreements and growing pains, moments when the old wounds threatened to reopen. But every time, we found a way forward, guided by the hard-won wisdom of our shared experience. And slowly but surely, Shady Oaks became more than just a collection of houses. It became a true community, a place where every person was valued for who they were, not what they owned or how well they conformed to someone else's idea of perfection. As for Jenna and I, we found ourselves at the center of it all, not as leaders or authority figures, but as neighbors and friends. We hosted backyard movie nights and led nature walks in the nearby woods. We helped Mr. Nakamura build his koi pond and taught Ms. Johnson's kids how to plant a vegetable garden. And every evening, we sat on our porch swing, listening to the laughter and music and life that flowed through the once silent streets. There were moments when I almost couldn't believe it was real. Moments when I'd catch a glimpse of an unfamiliar car on the street and feel a flicker of the old fear, a momentary certainty that Karen had somehow returned to resume her reign of terror. But then I'd see a neighbor waving from their window or hear the sound of children playing in the park, and the fear would melt away, replaced by a bone-deep sense of belonging and peace. Because this was our home now, not just a place to live, but a place to thrive, to grow, to be our fullest and truest selves. And we had fought for it, every one of us, with everything we had. Of course, the story of Shady Oaks wasn't over. There would be new challenges and new changes, new neighbors to welcome and old ones to bid farewell. But I knew with a certainty that went beyond words that we were ready for whatever the future might bring. Because we had something that Karen, in all her grasping for power and control, could never understand. We had each other. We had the strength of a community that had looked into the face of darkness and emerged unbroken, unbowed, and unafraid. And as the sun set over the rooftops of Shady Oaks, casting everything in a warm, golden glow, I took Jenna's hand and smiled. "Welcome home," I said, not just to her, but to everyone and everything that made this place what it was. And in the gentle squeeze of her fingers, in the chorus of crickets and wind chimes and distant laughter, I heard the neighborhood whisper back, "Welcome home."